Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back, guys. Today we're going to be looking at the rise of communism in China. And if you look at your I Can statement, we're kind of going to be creating like a timeline today. So we're going to be kind of hitting some of the major events from like the victory of the Civil War for the communists to the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, all the way up to eventually Tiananmen Square. Well, we'll kind of fill in our dates and kind of create a timeline as we go through this today together. All right. So as we go through, please fill in your information on your notes document. We're going to start off with the fall of the dynastic cycle. And so we're going all the way back to 1911 as we like kind of begin to put our timeline together here. And we've already talked about this. We talked about this, from the beginning of the year when we talked about China. They had thousands of years of history of dynasties, right? These families that were in control, and they would rise to power, and they would be in power for a while, and eventually they would start to decline, or someone would challenge them for the mandate of heaven, and they would kind of go into a time of chaos, and then another family would rise up and unite the rest of the provinces. Eventually, what we see with this is Dr. Sun Yat-sen was in power this time, and he was actually fighting a rebellion against the Manchu dynasty. All right, the Manchu dynasty had been in power this time, and they were the ones that were kind of slowly losing power. We saw corruption taking over. We saw the Opium War really affected things, and so Dr. Sun Yat-sen was fighting this rebellion, and unfortunately his rebellion failed to establish his and kind of win over his goal, and that was to create a Western style democracy in China. Unfortunately the rebellion fails, and when that happens, the Manchu dynasty loses power as well, and warlords come in and kind of take over the country for that time. And so the fall of the dynastic cycle ushers in kind of a chaotic time frame or time in China itself. All right, and that kind of leaves this power void there, and we're going to start to see what happens here with that fall of the dynastic cycle and with those warlords in power. The next events we're going to get into here, we're kind of fast forward a little bit up to about 1927, and so that's where we see the rise of communism, and we end up with kind of a civil war that starts to happen here, and this is a really long civil war. All right, so the communist revolution starts to take hold in China at this point. And so two men kind of rise to power. Chiang Kai-shek, the man on the left there, he rises to power through the Nationalist Party, and he kind of starts to gain control of China with that party, and over time gain more and more following. The man on the right there, Mao Zedong, also rose to power during this time, and he was controlling the Communist Party, and he actually eventually will lead their forces. A little bit of a battle here as we start to see the Civil War taking shape between the nationalists and the communists. And Mao is the leader that leads those forces of the Communist Party to safety in 1934. They call that the Long March, where they march their way out of danger here from the Nationalist Party. Eventually, Chiang and Mao would team up and work together during World War II. When the Japanese come in and start to fight in Manchuria and start to take over portions of China from 1937 to 1945, the nationalists and the communists work together to attempt to push back or stop the Japanese forces. All right. Once the Japanese, once the Japanese are out and World War II is over, the communists start to gain more strength and support from the people. And so eventually on October 1st, 1949, Mao and the communists defeat Chiang and the nationalists in the Civil War. So the Civil War finally concludes in 1949. And Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists flee. They leave China. They go to the island of Taiwan, and they actually establish their own government there in Taiwan. And the communists then take over and control mainland China. And they proclaim China what they call the People's Republic of China. All right, so that's they call it at that point. So they have completely taken over. We'll take a closer look at Taiwan in a little while here with an activity, but the idea that they left and established their own government in Taiwan with the nationalists is going to bring up some problems. All right, we'll see problems for foreign affairs. We'll see issues between Taiwan and China. We'll see problems with other countries, and so we'll talk about that more with our next activity. So, quick check for understanding here, guys. The communist takeover of China forced the nationalists to do what? We actually just got done talking about this. So if you take a look, I would highlight it on your page as well. You may see a question like this on your test. but it forced them to flee to Taiwan. All right. Continuing down our timeline, guys, we get into what the communists had dubbed the 5-year plan. All right. Now, we had seen something similar to this in the Soviet Union as well. All right. And so in China, the 5-year plan that they put in place takes place between 1952 and 1957. And it is essentially an economic plan that's put in place to try to catch China up to the rest of the Soviet Union, or excuse me, to the Soviet Union, trying to catch up so that those two countries are basically on equal footing at this time. And so the 5-year plan mirrored the exact same plan that we saw the Soviets run prior to this. And so to help them with this, because they were both communist brethren as well, the Soviets lent money, borrowed money, I should say, to the Chinese in order to kind of help bring in help industrialize, help to modernize some of their machinery that was needed for modernizing and catching the country up to the Soviet Union. And China had quite a bit of success modernizing their country and their economy. They caught up to caught up to the Soviet Union very quickly during this 5-year plan. This was successful. All right, when we look at it, eventually, China, towards the end of the plan, they decided that they no longer needed Soviet help, and they rejected the Soviet influence. And so, yes, they're communist, but they didn't rely on the Soviets for help anymore, and they started to try to go about things their own way. All right, and that kind of leads us to our next big one. This is essentially another 5-year plan that Mao Zedong had tried to put in place. He called it the Great Leap Forward. And so in 1956, he decided that they were going to shift to a new policy and attempt kind of a socialist experiment in the country. And that socialist experiment was there to try to bring about equality in China. He was trying to kind of bring the poor up to the same level as kind of the middle class, essentially. And so he wanted to bring about major change. He put in large-scale industrial projects like building of dams and railroads and infrastructure. He attempted to do this in order to bring about change. He believed that the Great Leap Forward would help China leap ahead of the Soviet Union and actually catch them up to Western countries like Great Britain. All right. Now, one of the big experiments that they did with the Great Leap Forward was Mao actually organized the country into communes. And the communes were basically people would go and live in almost like villages, and they would go and live on their own land was taken away. Their animals were taken away. They were forced to live, work, and eat in these not like new communes, almost like these small villages that essentially would do everything all together. They would share everything. They would work together for everything. Ultimately, the communes and the Great Leap Forward was a massive failure. All right, the policies failed big time. They were aided in failure because there was also a time here of droughts and floods going on. And so that led to a lot of food shortages, which led to a lot of economic issues, which led to a lot of people starving to death because they did not have the food they needed. And we don't know the exact numbers, but the estimates put it at about 20 million people died with the failure of the Great Leap Forward. All right, it did not work, and obviously killed a lot of people. 20 million is a lot of people when we talk about economic and food shortages. Okay? So we can kind of see some of this. These are the communes that we're talking about. They literally worked, lived, did everything in these communes. You can see them working in the fields there all together from that commune. They all ate together in the communes. And again, the biggest problem came down to the average calorie intake. If you take a look, the red bars are the average calorie intake there at the time, and if you look at this too, in 1960 and 61, they literally saw the lowest average daily intake for China, which was about 1,500 calories a day. That's very low. If you take a look at the top up there, you can see what the international standard for a man working a hard 8-hour day is, right around 3,000 calories, maybe a little higher. Today we look at typically about 2,000 would be a typical diet, but you can see 60 and 61 when they put these in place. And prior to that, the calorie intake went way down. And for the number of hours they were working, that was really, really bad. Okay. All right, so the next kind of major event we have that we're going to fill in on our timeline right here is 1966, and that's the Cultural Revolution. The Cultural Revolution ends up being kind of a violent attempt at social change. So Mao was trying to rid China of what he called the old customs, habits, and thoughts. He was trying to get rid of some of the old cultural ideas that the country had, and he was trying to help modernize the country. Mao also had what he called the Little Red Book, which essentially was kind of a book on how, like almost a how to kind of rid the country of these customs and habits that form the old culture. And he was trying to get young people on board to do this. And so he actually had young people kind of lead the revolution. He had the Red Guard, which became kind of a radicalized student group who went throughout the countryside and the country, burning down ancient artwork and taking out ancient books, and essentially mass murdering people that didn't comply with the Cultural Revolution and Mao's new standards. And so they kind of went through the country, kind of terrorizing the country. Eventually, Jiang Qing, who was Mao's wife, ended up gaining power during this time because Mao dies. And so Mao's wife attempts to kind of take control and continue on Mao's work at this time. And she had three other people that she worked with. They were called the Gang of Four. And the Gang of Four's job was to attempt to overthrow the government so that Mao's wife, or Jiang Cheng, could continue the work of Mao. All right. So trying to overthrow the government that was in place at the time. Now, they are not successful. Fortunately, I guess for China, they aren't successful, and eventually the Cultural Revolution is kind of walked back, and they make changes here, but not massive changes that the people had wanted at this time, or the Cultural Revolution called for. So you can see here some of the cultural things. You can see almost kind of like a similar like the Hitler Youth, right, where you've got the children kind of being indoctrinated here with the militaristic style. You can see them burning some of the some old artifacts and things there as well. And again, they all were supposed to follow the rules that were laid out in the Red Book, which you can see them holding in the top picture, and then the propaganda picture on the right too. Quick check for understanding. All of the following were among Mao's goals for China, except which one? If we take a look there, building a socialist society in which all workers were equal, encouraging the growth of a strong middle class of factory managers and intellectuals, making China a modern industrial nation, or preserving the revolutionary spirit among China's people. When it comes down to it, he didn't actually have anything to do with B. He wasn't actually trying to encourage the growth of the middle class. He was just trying to make everyone equal, right? That's more of the socialist society aspect of it. One more check for understanding here, guys. The Cultural Revolution was a plan to make Chinese culture popular in the West, employ artists during economic hard times, replace ancient culture with a socialist culture, or rid China of Western influence. And it was all about the socialist culture, trying to get rid of that old guard, that old culture, and replace it with socialism. All right. So after Mao's death and after Jiang Qing is kind of defeated there as well with the Gang of Four, we see that a new leader kind of comes in and takes control at this time. And that man's name is Deng Xiaoping. And Deng comes in and becomes the new Chinese leader in 1979. So there's our next date that we can kind of fill in on our timeline. Deng shifts a lot of the policies in China's economy towards making China a stronger country, making them more strong economically. And so some of the reforms he puts in place, specifically for industry and agriculture, really help the economy quite a bit. And a lot of what he does helps to modernize China as well. So he kind of accomplishes a lot of the goals that Mao had just by simply altering industry and agriculture. The way he helps to bring about the economic change is he actually starts to encourage some aspects of capitalism. And so capitalism starts to get increased and accepted more widely in China at this time. And the agricultural and industrial output increased greatly under Deng Xiaoping as well. So he kind of comes in and makes a major change. And that's where the little comic is there on the left. The idea that you go from the Red Guard and it's a transformer and you become a capitalist, right? But the idea is that Deng made some major economic changes that really benefited the country. All right. Last but certainly not least, guys, we kind of can fill in our last spot there on our Chinese timeline here, and that is while Deng is in power in 1989, we have an event that a lot of times gets called the Tiananmen Square Massacre. Basically, what we have is this demonstrations start, and young people are the ones that are actually leading these demonstrations, and they are pro-democracy supporters. They want China to fully embrace not only capitalism but democracy as well, allow people to vote and get rid of communism and socialism here. And so young people start gathering in Tiananmen Square, and they are speaking out for change and trying to end the government corruption that they have. They want better schools. These are university students, and they are leading a hunger strike at the time. And so finally, this has been going on for a little while. And finally, in early June, Deng Xiaoping and the government order the tanks and the army to go remove these demonstrators. And in maybe one of the most famous images that we have from the 80s, I would say, in that era for sure, is there's a lot of fighting that takes place for the military as they're on their way to Tiananmen Square, because the people in and around that area did not want the military to get to the college students that were demonstrating, because they feared that they would be killed if they got there. And so a lot of fighting occurred along the route. And one of the most iconic images is the man with the briefcase who literally just steps out in front of the tank so that they can't continue on. And the tank kind of tries to go around him, and he kind of moves around it as well. This was an image that was captured, a video that was captured by Western journalists that had to smuggle it out of the country. We don't actually know what happened here. But we do know that there was an attack. The military killed people along the way here to get to Tiananmen Square. We don't know. We estimate that the numbers may have been around 3,000 people were killed by the government at this time, their own people. But after the Tiananmen Square massacre or Tiananmen Square incident, Western countries stopped their support of China for about 10 years. Around 2003, in addition to that, even though they hadn't been getting a lot of support from the Western nations at that point, around 2003, we start to see China actually become the world's second largest economy. And so a lot of the work that we saw with capitalism, and even some of the work that was being done with protesting, we've seen how far China has come, even though, I mean, Tiananmen Square is a terrible thing. And again, we don't have exact numbers because they were never released to the Western media, but some 3,000 people killed by their own government. All right. But again, China does go on to become a large economy, a very strong economy as well, like they are today. So here is the Tiananmen Square incident. Here you can see all the people that had taken up kind of short-term residence in the Tiananmen Square that were protesting and hunger striking. Here's the military kind of getting ready to take the area. You can see as they came in with tanks and soldiers. And like I said, we don't know exactly what happened. There's a little video clip, but I think we'll save that for later on. So ladies and gentlemen, if you have any other questions, guys, the video clip is available right on Schoology, so you can check that there as well. But if you have any questions, make sure you get in touch, and I will see you again soon.